Rebecca. And we know that AP World isn't a piece of cake, but we hope that this video will give you some good laughs and inform you on how the French Revolution began and how it developed into what it did.
We also hope that this video will demonstrate God's complexity throughout history.
So, how did the French Revolution begin?
Well, it's kind of like baking a cake.
What's Gibby thinking about?
Tonight the music seems so loud. I wish that we could lose this crowd.
Kate, did you see the cake America made? It looks so good.
I saw this. All we have here is stale bread. I think we should try to make our own version of America's cake.
Wait, but we don't have a recipe.
It shouldn't be that hard as long as we have all the right ingredients.
So what are the ingredients used to make a good cake?
Well, I know one ingredient that's important for any baked good, even stale bread, is flour. Flour in the cake batter represents the political structure in France before the Revolution, particularly the Estates Generale. The Estates Generale was France's national assembly prior to the French Revolution. It was a group of representatives who voted on behalf of each estate. Each estate only had one vote. This was extremely unfair because one vote represented 97% of the population, where 2 votes represented the other 3%. A financial crisis in France led to King Louis XVI calling the Estates Generale to meet for the first time in 175 years.
This meeting was called to make a vote on whether the top 2 estates should be taxed. However, the final decision was that they were not going to be taxed because the peasants only had 1 vote and the other top 2 estates had 2, therefore making it uneven. In response, the peasants created the National Assembly where they felt like the will of the majority of the people would be represented. From this also stemmed radical groups such as the Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre. Hold on, something's not right.
We need an outfit change.
Let's get back to the video.
Coming down on me.
Ooh, another ingredient used is eggs.
The eggs represent
Cracks in France.
the first offense of violence was the storming of the Bastille, protesting King Louis XVI. The Bastille was a prison fortress that often held political prisoners. These political prisoners were people that protested the monarchy not making King Louis XVI happy.
This violence would set the tone for the radical turn that happened later in the revolution. During this storming, around 100 people died. Oh no, there's some shells in here.
It's okay, it won't matter anyway.
Also, something I know that will make a cake a crowd pleaser is sugar.
I mean, who doesn't like sugar?
Sugar is like the sweetness of Enlightenment ideas. A cake would slowly be crumbling if there was too much sugar added, however, without it, it would be bland. The French wanted Enlightenment ideals of democracy, free expression, individual liberty, tolerance, property rights, and anti-religious authorities, trying to separate the state and church with the growing skepticism of it. This ultimately was inspired off of America's Declaration of Independence and led to the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen.
This document was created by Marquis de Lafayette and was heavily inspired by the author of America's Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. It abolished the old regime and all aristocratic privileges. Church and state were separated, and the government policy was to be guided by liberty, equality, and fraternity. These documents seem virtual copies of one another. However, looking closer shows some apparent differences. These differences were primarily guided by the fact that France blended Enlightenment ideas with utopian philosophies.
How much sugar do we use?
I don't know, but I think the more the better.
Sugar.
Another ingredient we need to add is oil.
Even though it doesn't really mix well with the other ingredients, it's super important.
The oil represents the separation of the upper and lower classes.
Also known as the ancien regime. The first estate, or the upper class in this social structure, was the clergy.
The second estate, or the middle class, was the nobility.
And the third estate, which is the lowest class and represented 97% of the population, was the peasants.
The peasants were mistreated and were the only taxed group. This caused a lot of tensions and discontent.
If you take a look at the photo on the slide, you'll see that the first and second estate are riding on the back of the third estate. This represents how the third estate carried the burden of the upper classes because they were the only taxed group.
And let's not forget water.
As seen in the previous video, the water represents the weak leadership and characteristics of King Louis XVI.
King Louis XVI was a selfish and manipulative ruler. He consistently put himself and his wife's lavish lifestyle above the needs of their people. For example, the building of the lavish palace at Versailles.
He was a coward who also tried to avoid the consequences for his action, fleeing and ended up being executed.
He also irresponsibly got involved in the American Revolution, causing the French to fall into a financial crisis further than they already were.
On top of all of this, he was an absolute monarch who misused his power.
Just to add it interesting, let's add some color.
Oops, didn't mean to add that much.
The red food coloring symbolizes,
The blood shed during the French Revolution.
in total, over 40,000 people died. Here are some examples of the causes.
The storming of the Bastille.
The execution of King Louis XVI after he tried to escape.
And Maximilien Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety's leadership of the National Convention, which led to the Reign of Terror.
Well, this doesn't look like America's cake.
But in the end, we can make
Cake pops.
Although the French weren't able to make a cake like the Americans, they were able to make something good enough.
That was sweeter than the stale bread they had before.
Thanks for watching! I hope you were able to see the complexity in the beginning of the French Revolution.
And in God's story.
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably.